Hello, everyone. This is LaShawn Benedict here with Gordon Thane, my co host for this episode. And
Mm.
today we're going to talk about interesting, funny, cringeworthy stories
Ooh.
about what happens after interviews.
You're listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for all things public health and global health, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the social determinants of health, as well as interesting dialogues about the diverse career opportunities that exist in these fields. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so other people like you can benefit from our content.
Before we move on, it is important to note that the views expressed in this podcast are our own and do not necessarily represent any of the agencies or organizations we work for or are affiliated with.
So you're saying stuff can go wrong even after the interview is done?
All the time.
Okay. I think what you're referring to here is we've gone through the whole song and dance. We've asked you to prescribe interview questions, and then you turn it over to the candidate at the end to say, hey, do you have questions for us? So this is something that if you're a candidate, you should use to your advantage. You should use this as an opportunity to further impress your potential employer. And then you should use it as an opportunity to ask some insightful questions to show that you research something, there's some little bit of unfinished business there about the organization, something about a specific person on the panel, or something about the specific work that you're going to be doing as part of that job, just to show that you're in a state of job readiness.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I would recommend that people use this. But there's a weird thing where people get a little, you've gone through the interview, you were so nervous, you're over it. And a lot of people say, nope, I don't have any questions. Thank you, bye. And they already have the leave button lined up. As soon as they say bye, they can't stand in there for another minute. They're anxious, they're gone. And then I've also seen where it's sort of very uninspiring type questions where people probably Googled like what questions to ask and picked like the most generic,
Basic one.
cliche type questions possible. And I'd rather you just not ask those, to be honest. So I've heard, what's the culture like? Like, I don't know what that means, to be honest.
How do you define culture, right?
Yeah, like what are you looking for in that answer? I don't like, if we're recruiting you, think about this for a second. The recruiter is not going to say anything bad about the culture.
Yeah.
So if you truly want to assess that culture, you have to come at that question from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say culture, are you referring to, do people work late hours? Maybe that's important to you, to 9 to 5 and you're done. So there's a different way of arriving at that answer where you say, hey, instead of what's a culture, and you really want to know, am I going to be stressed working more than 8 hours a day? You say, hey, just there's a lot of work going on. I'm curious to see, in terms of the working schedule, people flex and work in the evenings, or depending on, oh, actually, no, we don't actually know. We make sure we do a good job of making sure people, and you've got the answer.
Yeah.
So I can give you a specific answer when you ask me a specific question, but if it's very generic, it feels like you're just asking a question to ask a question, which we're telling you should, and you absolutely should, but you have to dig a little bit deeper into seeing what's the best way to ask the question. And I've heard ones, yeah, what's a salary like?
Mm-hmm.
I don't get too mad at those. Those is a bit cringe for me, but I'm not mad at the person asking because it wasn't on the posting.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm not, but at that point you're already invested in it. Wait
Yeah.
to see if you get the offer.
Yeah.
If it's something that someone sent you an invite to interview, I'd actually be okay if you asked for the salary range at that point
Mm-hmm.
before doing the interview, if you did it in a respectful way. Especially if maybe you have a job that you're totally happy with, you don't want to waste their time, you don't want them to waste your time. I'm actually fine with it at that point, but in the interview, not so much. What about you? Any kind of weird type questions that you could have lived without as being on the interview panel?
I've heard ones before where it's like, when do I start?
Hmm.
So that's what if you didn't get selected? Like that's such a it's
It's
pretty
confident, isn't it? Aren't they trying to speak it into existence, LaShawn?
when do I start? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a well, you gotta hit them up with the hey, like unfortunately we have a process and we're interviewing many candidates. Like to
Right. So
let
you're
you
saying
know.
the way, right?
Yeah,
That's another dead end question where
yeah,
you they can't give you an answer. Or if they do that, we have many candidates, whatever. However, we're looking for the person to start
exactly.
in next date. So it's not really a you. That question doesn't get you a useful answer, is what Lashawn is saying. I think.
Yeah, I think it's about reframing the way you ask questions,
Mm,
like Gordon was saying. I think it's important at this point to just ask very informed questions. So
mm.
this is where I like flexing some of the
So where
research that
Lashawn
I've
goes in his
done.
bag right now.
Yeah, you bring it out of your bag. So be like, what did I say recently? Like, hey, I went through all these things on your website, the resources. I noticed these specific items. What kind of work went into the co-creation of some of these resources? Just as this would be something that I would be working on very closely. Wanted to understand how that process would work a bit more.
Mm,
It
right.
shows that you looked into it, you've done
Correct.
some research, and you get to show them like how many things you looked at and have went through already, right?
Mm,
So I feel like those are more valuable, and oftentimes you could see their eyes open up and they're like, "Wow, this dude actually took some time to
right.
go through the website, go through the
That's right.
strategic plan, go through the articles and the evidence base to pull this one out."
The honestly, the so there's sort of a beginner, intermediate, and advanced level to this questioning
Mhm.
stuff at the end. Beginner is Google stuff, write down 3 generic questions, ask it. Maybe you're going from asking no questions to asking those, good on you, cool. If you're already doing that, the next step is taking that step further to intermediate and advanced, like LaShawn mentioned, where you're not even necessarily interested in the response. You just want to show how much and see how
Mhm.
they react to it. So I've done ones where it's like, hey, yeah, I'm aware of the province made an announcement about pumping funding in this and this and this.
Mhm.
How does that affect the capacity of your X programs being able to deliver? Oh wow. So I've showcased now that I'm aware that this I'm looking at the news. I'm showcasing that I'm aware that I know that you have this program.
Mhm.
And now I'm asking you, how are you that extra funds, how are you going to use that to meet the needs of the community? The
Right.
reason that's important too is they're already talking about that internally,
Yeah.
and they're like, wow, we
This
could just
person already
add Gordon
knows.
into the meeting right now
Yeah.
because he's we're
Yeah.
already talking about this.
Yeah.
So it's not about like actually wanting to know the answer to something. It's like, I see you. It's like, hey, I got my eyes on you, I know what's
Yeah.
going on, and I'm the guy, I'm the
Yeah.
person. So it's
Yeah.
so try to shift it from a chore of you have to ask something to you've done all these research, and like I think this is part of our character, Lashawn, where we don't want to waste anything. If I
Mhm.
spent a whole day or a week or whatever preparing for
Yeah.
that interview
Yeah.
and you didn't ask me about half the stuff that I read, I'm gonna tell you about it at the end.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
tell you
you
about it at
will.
the end.
Yeah,
So I
you will.
typically joke around like, oh, questions for us. I'm like, yep, how much time do you have? And like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah, yeah. That's a good
I'm like,
one.
all right,
Mhm.
ready? And then I just
Yeah.
go in the bag. Yep. So this.
Yeah.
How are these funding things gonna do this? And LaShawn, I noticed that you recently did this and this. How does that
Yeah.
connect back to? It's just showcasing that. You, one of the people that we like watching, LaShawn, is that First We Feast, the hot wings guy,
Okay, okay. Yeah, yeah.
and and he always shooks the guests that he's interviewing.
Yeah. How'd you know
So
that? How'd you
right,
know?
how do you know that? So remember, when the interview is done,
Yeah.
you're the one now asking the questions,
Yeah.
but the goal of you asking the questions is to impress them
Yeah.
at the depth of the questions that you're asking,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, that's a
And I,
good.
I think it's a good representation of
Mm,
how much insight you could potentially bring to the team,
right.
right? So it's like maybe you want to better understand from past analysis what is the political, environmental,
Mm,
social, legal landscape of this company. Maybe you want to
right.
understand more about some of the external factors or challenges causing pressure for this company,
Right.
you could definitely ask that. And a more recent example is when I have done that question, asking about some of the challenges that are being faced, you preface that with some of the stuff you already have noted and you
Right.
could
That's right.
already see as a challenge, because as you're stepping into that role, these are challenges that you have to come up with
Yeah.
solutions and work towards solutions for. So if we're able to highlight that as a challenge that you're going to face and connect it with some of the strategic goals that they're pursuing as an organization, they're like, yeah, this dude gets it. And they get very impressed for your foresight and thought into that.
LaShawn is a master of asking questions and responding to his own questions in the
Yes.
same light in a way that makes him seem very smart. So he's mastered that. I will say, like, it could be subtle things too. I've been in a situation too, LaShawn, where you know how I like to analyze the job postings and stuff,
Yeah.
probably more than I should. But I noticed they're hiring like multiple of the same positions. It was
Hmm.
like 6 or 4 or
Yeah.
something. Like, that's strange.
Yeah.
And then you kind of look on the websites, maybe you don't see a lot of history about that specific department. So I said, hey, and curious, it looks like there's a lot of resources being put into prioritizing this department and recruiting. Is this some kind of new department based on new strategic direction? And oh wow, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it is. What, and then they start popping off. The moment you can get them to start like talking, you're doing a good job as a candidate. And LaShawn, one of the ones that we touched on recently that we've experienced is when those questions where the person who's being interviewed asks the panel sort of, hey, what, just curious to see, LaShawn, you've been here for 5 years. What keeps you excited and motivated to, and it's like a very disarming question
Yeah.
where people love talking about themselves and what they do.
Yeah.
So that's a good question to ask at the end too.
Yep. Yep. I used that recently, and
Mm,
it was a panel interview, and we
right.
went around the room just having a little
And you
reflection
just
session.
named people individually, right? You're
Yeah.
like, yeah,
And
what
just like,
about you,
hey, what do
Gordon?
you think about this? What do you think
Mm,
about this? What do you think
you
about
just
this?
took
So,
control of that interview, eh?
yeah. Yeah. No, it was great. Another thing, after you're done your interview, a question may come up,
Mm,
or after you leave the interview, an email might come up
mm,
about salary and negotiations and offers.
mm,
And this may have been something that you already put in the system when you applied to a position, a
mm,
salary range that you wanted.
mm,
But when we're talking about salary negotiations, assuming the interview went well,
mm.
you get an offer. How do you approach an offer? Do you always just accept it? I'm lucky, let's do this? Is that the
Don't you just
plan?
you get so excited, just accept it? No?
Accept, accept, accept.
Yeah.
Right away, 1 minute response. Go.
Yeah. Hmm.
Do they do that or not?
I think
Should
they would
they?
love I think the employer would love if you accepted the first offer.
Right?
That's for sure. Why
Why
not,
is
right?
that?
Because they have a range and they likely will not offer the maximum they can give in the first offer. So if you take
Hmm.
the first offer, then they save a little bit of money, right?
Yep.
So it's a good idea to negotiate. I've had successes with negotiating and I've had
Hmm.
situations where it's like, nope,
Yeah.
nope, it is what it is. And you have to make a decision from there. Or is it a bluff, right?
Yep.
It's a game. Not really a game, but it's a song and dance. Maybe I can put it that
Yep.
way, where you're really trying to squeeze out as much as possible if you're the person who's seeking the job to get as much value for what you can offer as possible. But no, you just, you get typically sometimes you get an offer in an email or you get a phone call where
Hmm.
you have the high level terms of the offer. I always highly recommend that you don't say yes or no right away. It's, hey, thanks for the offer. I think LaShawn, you have a good way of saying it, but basically, I need some time and I'll get back to you. That's
Hmm.
always the best way. Don't accept it right away. And obviously, if it's $30 lower than what you expect, maybe you have a situation where you just applied for the wrong job because you know, it can be difficult there. But always ask for time to get back to them. And then you can get your thoughts together. Gordon can call LaShawn. LaShawn can call Gordon. You can call your colleagues, people that you trust, get some
Hmm.
advice. then you circle back to them. What's your experience on this, LaShawn, salary negotiations?
I think the realization has to be that at this point, it's very hard to get that offer rescinded. So you have to be
Right,
confident
right,
with that idea that they chose you out of all these people. I have some sort of leverage here,
right,
and you have the skills, competencies necessary to be able to do
right,
this job.
right.
So you can definitely choose to negotiate your job offer.
So
If
let
you
me let
choose
me
some, yeah,
yeah, I was gonna. I'll let you continue, but I wanted to interject. So
yeah,
basically, you're saying
hmm,
the idea is that you're the primary candidate at this point,
hmm,
and the worst that will happen if you negotiate respectfully
hmm,
is that they say,
respectfully, yeah,
"Sorry, this is the max,"
yeah,
and then it's still in your hands at that point to accept or decline it. It
yeah,
will never be, unless there's some nefarious business going on, it's very unlikely that they'll rescind it based on a respectful negotiation. So
yeah.
LaShawn you're basically saying put that to the side and then try to get the best amount for you at that point without worrying about them pulling the rug from underneath you.
Yeah, and I would also say that, like Gordon said, they're not gonna give you the maximum amount of money right away.
Mm.
And you also there's also a term in psychology that they use is an anchoring bias.
Mm.
And what that basically is when a company offers you something, they're gonna choose a number that's low, and your response to that number is gonna be close to that anchor point. But what
Mm.
you need to understand is that, you've done the research, you know the market value, so they're going to try to offer you something close to that and counter offer you something close to that. But you have to
Mm.
realize that if you have a number in mind, you should say that. So even if it's much higher than what it was initially offered, you
Mm.
should you should select that higher number.
Mm.
And then maybe you'll come closer to that number once they come back with the counter offer. But their intention is that if they're gonna give you if they say your first offer is $30 an hour, you're gonna come back with the similar value close to that
Mm.
anchor point. So like 32 instead of saying like 55 or something like that. So
Right.
just be aware of that and just potentially choose something higher so that when you continue the negotiations, it's farther away from that initial number.
And is that why it's important, one, to have an idea of what the range is
Mhm.
going in, and then
Yeah.
two, to not accept or decline it right away, but
Yeah.
talk to who you need to feel
Mhm.
confident in what your counter offer will be? Is that kind of why those two
Yeah,
things are important?
it's important, and it's just like an objective standard value that you could get from the market. Oftentimes, you can compare jobs. Maybe people that are in the current position has a number that you can use as your
Right.
point, but it's a good way to just understand what the actual
Yeah.
standard would be in that position.
So do you have a story where you successfully negotiated something closer to what you wanted? And like what were the strategies that you use in that kind of communication for the negotiation?
Yeah, I would say all the positions that I've been a part of,
Mm.
I've always negotiated. And of course, they're going to offer you a value,
Mm.
and there's usually wiggle room from that value.
Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle,
So, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. So, I think of course, choosing a number that you're comfortable with that makes sense for your life, that's important.
wiggle. Mm.
But when you receive that offer and you're making a counter offer to what they offered you, make sure you're I would say the first thing is to try not being on email and communicating via email. Try to have a phone call to have these
Mm.
conversations so
Okay.
you're able to better express yourself.
Mm.
And when you have that, you're going to say something along the lines of, "Hey, appreciate the offer. It's a bit lower than what was expected. I would like a salary adjustment to X because I bring XYZ to the table. And I know that with my experiences, XYZ,
Mm.
I'm able to contribute and add value to your company. And you need to kind of restate your thesis of why you think you're going to be
Mm.
perfect for this job,
Mm.
and that should be that's a good strategy to get what you want, and then they'll go back, talk to the people they need to talk to, and then get back to you with the value you asked, or maybe a bit lower but higher than the initial value. So again, it's a bit of song and dance, as you were saying,
Mm,
Gordon. But yeah, you just have to follow through with the process. And again, oftentimes you will get a little bump,
yeah,
but again, you're not going to lose a job offer if you
right,
ask
right.
for
It just
adjustment.
sure it'll be an extra nervy 2 3 days as you
Yeah,
navigate that, but like
yeah, that's
LaShawn's
it.
saying, you won't lose it. I think the way to know you're at that tipping point is when
Yeah,
they return with the same offer as the last
yeah,
time and they
yeah,
double down and say, sorry,
yeah,
that's it. Then
yeah,
that's probably the highest you can push them. Then
yeah.
it's up to you at that point what you want to do.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. How about you, Gordon? Did you have a thing?
It's interesting. I've had stories where it's been a hard no, like, nope,
Yeah.
uh not gonna happen. And this is dependent on there's certain situations you might go into where there's maybe it's a union or a
Mhm.
set wage grid where they already mapped out. If you have 1 year experience, you go here. If
Yeah.
you have this degree, you go here. Those are more difficult to negotiate. So organizations that have very complex and structured wage grids are less flexible to negotiating. Despite that, you should still try to negotiate. You'll have an idea of the number in your head, and it's again up to you what you want to do. So I've had
Mhm.
that experience. I've also had experience where you're able to successfully negotiate, and I use the similar steps to what LaShawn mentioned. And the idea here, just to go in with some level of conviction and belief in yourself, that if you're kind of, well, I think I deserve that because maybe I can kind of offer. That's like, you gotta fake the confidence if you don't have it.
Yeah,
It's you're the leading candidate, so there's
yeah,
something in you that they want. So showcase that in a last ditch attempt to get the most amount of money possible for your starting salary, and then yeah, that's the best way to approach it.
yeah. No, that's a good way to do it.
That reminds me, LaShawn, you're
Uh-huh.
not gonna get off the hook here.
Uh-oh.
So this ties into salary negotiation. So what if this could be hypothetical or real? This is up to you to determine if this is real or hypothetical. You do an interview. It was great. You got good energy. You're in the process of writing your thank you letter because that's a good practice to do, where you just say thanks for the time, loved meeting everyone, a little quick restating of what you're going to bring, and then looking forward to next steps.
Mhm.
Cool. What if you're about to do that and then you get the offer before you even get a chance to dissect or debrief from what your interview was? And like you get the offer, do it's so quick. Why not just accept it right away? Like how do you handle those early offer situations where you get so excited that they think that you're the best person and you learn this within a few hours or a day after you complete the interview?
Yeah, this has happened to me before. It's a
Mm,
true
it's
story.
not hypothetical.
It's not hypothetical.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if they know you're the right candidate, they've gone through all the candidates, you might be in a position to know that you got the job offer pretty soon thereafter the interview.
mm,
Again, business as usual. You can be excited and it's a happy moment, of course, but do not accept it right away,
mm.
right? Don't accept it
But
right
it's
away.
Friday, it's 2:30, you wanna go into the weekend sealing the
Nope.
deal? No?
No way. No way. So
Mm,
always, regardless of how happy you may be
mm,
and how for sure how you know in your heart of hearts you're gonna accept this offer,
mm,
take it slow.
mm.
Take it slow.
Have fun with it.
Have fun with it,
Mm,
right?
okay. Alright, alright. I'll take your word for it as someone who's been in that situation. Now, the other alternative can happen too, where you don't get the offer, and in fact, you're told that they've selected someone else.
Right.
And just like the "thank you for interviewing me" communication,
Yeah.
there's also some communication when you learn that you're not going to be selected for the position that you interviewed for. I have a story where someone said something hectic
Okay.
when they were told that they didn't get the position. And it was along the lines of, yeah, no surprise here.
Oh.
I could tell from 2 minutes in that I wasn't going to get it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I was like, yeah, that's what I said too. Interesting. Is it, you could tell because you didn't perform to what you were hoping you would perform, or you felt that there was some kind of bias against you from the outset. Anyways, so the person said that. And the interesting thing, LaShawn, is there were more, and I said this before, there were more positions that were going to be posted. And the way
Yeah.
we do it is we we keep the interviews on record,
Yeah.
and if additional positions get posted, we'll actually reach out and say, hey, we can use
Yeah.
your interview scores to see. So don't be so short-sighted for that specific position that you burn the bridge in any way for future opportunities that you could probably get if you waited a week. Maybe you would have gotten a, hey, you did really well, and then we wouldn't have had to go through this awkward exchange of where you said something nondescript where no one really knows what that means, or is it an
Yeah.
accusation, is it like, what are you
Yeah.
trying to say here? So you want to think really carefully about the way you handle rejection is also important.
Yeah.
And rejection is a very time specific thing where rejection really means you did not get that specific position that you applied for. You could probably get other positions in the future with that same organization without probably even having to do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
don't burn the bridge or give the impression that you think the process was disingenuous or anything like that, unless you truly believe so and you have proof and you can challenge it in a respectful way. But you really want to think about that. And one thing people don't think about, LaShawn, too, is there's other people interviewing.
Yeah.
You don't know how they did.
Yeah.
I've done some interviews. Some of them are really bad.
Yeah.
And some of them, it's like, oh my gosh, there's really great candidates and I don't know who to pick.
Yeah.
So there's, for every time you feel like you were wronged, there's also other people who probably did just as well or better than you who also didn't get it. So it's easy to be a little bit more self-centered with the process, but just don't be short-sighted. Think about the long game. Don't burn the bridges.
Don't burn the bridges. Alrighty, folks.
Mm.
So that was it for today.
Mm.
We talked a lot about some of the things that may happen after you just complete an interview, some of our stories, experiences. Hopefully, you can relate to some of them and you can anticipate some of these things happening as you go through the job process.
Mm.
So this is Gordon. No, this is not Gordon. This is LaShawn
Right.
and Gordon. signing
Mistaken
off.
identity right now.
Okay. Peace.
Peace. Thank you for listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for informative conversations, inspiring community action. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. See you in the next one.